Welcome back to Deep Roots Farm, and today it's April the 20th and it's time to pot on the tomato transplants. So we're taking the flats out of the propagation box, and there they've been grown on bottom heat at the required temperature of 70 to 75 degrees Fahrenheit or 15 to 18 degrees centigrade. And we just seed them quite thickly, as you can see, in flats. We call them mother flats like this. And we are now going to separate them out and put them into their own individual 4-inch pots. And in order to do that, we've made up a mix of our commercial potting mix, which is a sterilized professional mix with mycorrhizae in it that we use from a 3.8 cubic foot bale, and some screened compost. And we've made up a mix which is about 30% compost to 70% of our professional potting medium. So that's been well and truly mixed. It's had a little pinch of granular organic fertilizer added to it, and in which case that means that we never have to worry about fertilizing, and they will be transplanted from these pots out into the garden. So we usually fill our pots when the mix is dry, and then we pre-moisten everything, and that we have here. And then using a dibber, we make a hole in the pot going right down to the bottom, because we want to plant them as deeply as possible into their pots. Now, going through the flat, we're going to be picking out the sturdiest of the transplants. And what you should have here is a nicely rooted, sturdy, straight-stemmed seedling like this, ready to get potted on. You don't want to let them get too root bound, because that really stresses them out. And we're going to just a little tip here, that every part of the stem of the tomato plant which is planted underground is going to produce roots. And that means that actually, if we plant these, we'll just remove the seed leaves here, and if we plant these right down to the bottom of the pot, then we are going to get a whole extra set of roots forming along the stem here. So be very careful that you don't snap the stem when you're handling them. The ideal way to handle them is like picking them up tenderly from the top and then placing them into your pot so that the roots are touching the bottom of the 4-inch pot. And then using your fingers, like your thumb and your forefinger, just pinch the soil around the stem, making sure that your transplant is in the center of the pot and is sitting straight up. Most important thing when you're doing this is to actually make sure that you keep your transplants labeled throughout the entire process, so that you don't lose track of the varieties that you're dealing with. This is Purple Bumblebee, a cherry tomato. So we're going to put a label in the flat to keep it going, matched to the label in the mother flat. So there you have it. And we're going to take these, they're in transplant shock once you've actually disturbed the roots. This is now in transplant shock for 2 to 3 days. So recommending that you don't put them in full sun now, that we actually put them under the table out of the sun and give them a few days, 2 to 3 days to recover, at which point then they can come back up into the sun and carry on growing into healthy, well-rooted little transplants. So I've just finished my first flat of Purple Bumblebee transplants, and before they go off onto the shelf to recover from transplant shock, I'm going to water them in. And watering them in is important because that actually fills in any air holes which may be around the roots of the plant. So you want to just water them in to settle them in to their pots and get rid of any air holes that might invite disease around the roots of the transplant. And there we go, we're done.
And here are the tomatoes, standing nice and strong and tall in their 4-inch pots. And this is the seeding greenhouse to date. We've started hardening off some of our cool weather vegetables. And so these are the Cascadia Sugar Snap peas. Those are seeded into 6-packs and are ready to go for the fundraiser. We also built a DIY quick hardening off table, and underneath you can see that these are plants that are seeded into 6-packs, and they are all for the fundraiser. So we built the hardening off table using pieces of wood that we had laying around, and we put the wood on top of sawhorses, as you can see in the photo here. And then I had an old hose that was just laying around, so we cut the hose into the mini hoops and screwed the hose to the wood on the outside of the table. And then I just placed the winter remay over top, and there's a piece of wood that runs along the center of the hoops just to keep them stable. So that's a quick DIY hardening off table, just using scrap materials that we had around the farm. So you can actually use something like this to act as a little cold frame to start your cool weather vegetables early in the season to get a head start. And we've got some herbs pricked out from their mother flat inserts. And the cabbage that we potted on last week is looking good. We've also been busy pricking out and potting on our other heat lovers, the peppers and the eggplant, and the basil will be soon to come. We are running a 15-member CSA, and we just harvested this week for our first box of the year. And so this is cut and come again arugula. It's seeded closely together, and we're just taking the tops and cutting them right above the grow tip. And here's a little look of our box this week. We've got garlic and carrots and chives and arugula and kale, and the value was $22. And next week we will have all of our mustard greens available. You can see they're just underneath this insect netting, which is in the big greenhouse Abuela. So they are seeded pretty densely in rows so that we can harvest them as baby greens, cut and come again. And here's our mixed lettuce bed, which will also be a cut and come again. It's coming up nicely, except the 2 middle rows didn't really germinate that well. So, And this is what the purple auroch looks like if you let it go to seed and then you let the seeds drop all over the ground. So talk about self-resilient food security. So we're going to thin these babies out, and I'll be adding them to either the mustard green mix or I'll be adding them to a stir-fry mix next week. But look at all that yummy food, and the plant just gave it to us for free. So that's the farm in a nutshell this week. I hope you enjoyed watching the video.